The subject today is conscience. Follow your conscience. Torah is a general attitude towards things that are true and things that are false. That if something is, maybe it's a little too sanguine, if something's really, really, obviously out of touch with reality, then it's not going to be popular. There's going to be some element of truth, or some near truth. And then it's skewed, it's out of proportion, it doesn't take into account other factors, but there's got to be something to it that has a correct purchase. And then the danger is that it isn't kept within its appropriate bounds. And I think that's to a great extent the case with the idea of a conscience. Follow your conscience. Now I want to come at the idea from a few different points of view, generally, and then I want to talk about where it could have some references to Jewish ideas and what the boundaries are on those connections. Let me start with something very general and often, I think, misunderstood. Well, that's becoming a mantra, I think, the way I talk. So the things that interest me. To thine own self be true. Thou canst not be false to any man. That's a quote from Shakespeare. I found out fairly recently that Shakespeare presented it as something false, something he didn't believe in. Puts it in the mouth of a character who says things that Shakespeare was against. I was very happy to hear that. But I think that to thine own self be true can be a recipe for disaster. Here's what has come out in certain areas of psychology recently. You shouldn't lie to anyone. You shouldn't pretend. You shouldn't dissemble. And you shouldn't have to hide. Say what you think. Say what you feel. If you don't like someone, tell him. Don't like what he is. Don't like what he's doing. Don't like his ideas. Don't like certain social forms. Don't like certain values. Simply speak your mind. So let's see. My wife buys a new hat. She brings it home and she says, "Tell me, what do you think of a new hat?" "Oh, I hear the psychologist in the background. Don't lie, don't dissemble, don't hide your true feelings." "Honey, it's really pretty awful, actually." That's the course of wisdom? Really? You couldn't think of another alternative? Somehow to build the person's self-confidence and build a relationship and so on and so on? Is it really the one and only feature of all human interactions to say what you think and say what you feel? So let's see. If I don't represent what I truly think, what I truly feel, I'm not being true to myself. Right? In that sense, I'm definitely not being true to myself. So what? So what? Why is that so terrible? Indeed, where is the voice inside me which says this is insane? Where's that coming from? Where's the voice inside me which says I ought to care about my wife's feelings? That's not part of myself. I shouldn't be true to that voice. Excuse me, both of them are mine. Both of them are parts of me. And they're telling me to do opposite things. So how exactly am I supposed to be true to myself when I have contradictory inner feelings? Which is often. I think it's often for most people. Okay. So let's say I have a hierarchy. Something that's more important, something less important. When there's a conflict, you go after what's more important. More important to who? well, more important to me. So I'm not supposed to be false to myself. Yeah. If one part of me says express A, and the other side of the part says hide A, and I judge the part that says hide A is more important, more fundamental, more valuable, then be true to that part of yourself that you judge to be the more important part. That's how we'll put being true to yourself. But now, let's ask this. Am I ideal? Am I perfect? Probably not. I can't speak for you, but I know too much about myself to consider myself to be perfect. I have flaws. Should I be true to the flaws? Should I take that as my template for self-expression? Be true to who you are. I don't like certain types of people. Part of me says, well, you ought to be more tolerant. Okay, now you say, well, which part is more important? But maybe the part that's more important is flawed. Couldn't that be? Couldn't the part that I judge to be more important be flawed? So why should I be tied to that? Indeed, maybe my judgment, which part is more important, is flawed. I have these two competing considerations, A and B. I judge A to be more important than B. Sometimes A and B are in conflict, so I say, well, when they're in conflict, I'm going to express A, because that's the more important part. But there are two challenges here. Number one, maybe I'm wrong in thinking that A is the more important part. Who gave me a guarantee that in this judgment I'll always be right? I'm infallible. Couldn't make a mistake as to what's more important. That's absurd. A person can make a mistake about anything. And second of all, maybe I don't understand A correctly. I don't understand what it means. I don't understand what it says, what it implies. Why should there be anything tying me down? Why should there be anything walling off part of me and saying, that's sacrosanct, that's beyond critique. That's beyond the consideration of change. You're just to be honest and express that because that's the top of the totem pole. Excuse me. You go through life, you meet people, you observe new things, you read about new things, and that sometimes forces you to reconsider. Travel does that. Because if you're alert, if you're going to travel to broaden your perspective on the world, you will learn things that you never anticipated. How many people have ended up in this yeshiva totally unexpectedly? They came to the wall and somebody said, hello, are you Jewish? And they thought, am I? I don't know. Am I really Jewish or not? And then they said, would you like to go to someplace for a Shabbos meal or for a class? And totally unexpectedly, they ended up in a place like this, which forces them to question a great deal of what they took for granted up until now. So that being the case, where is the wisdom in saying to your own self, be true? I think there's no wisdom to it at all. I mean, a person has to be aware of the fluidity of life, aware of the fragility of what he happens to believe at the moment, be open-minded, be prepared to reconsider, and to even, to a certain extent, seek out other people's views, either in person or through their communications, and to understand as much about the world and about himself as possible, and to grow and develop and change and hopefully improve. Okay, that's in general. Now let's come to the idea of a conscience. This rule, follow your conscience, is based on an assumption. The assumption is the conscience is a feature of your personality, of your psychology, which gives you accurate judgments of what is right and wrong, what is good and evil, what is just and what is unjust, what is obligatory and what is forbidden and what is permissible. only if you thought you had such a capacity, and not only had one, but could identify it, that's going to be very important, could this rule be sensible. Otherwise, it would either be meaningless, follow your conscience. My what? No. My left thumb? What's my conscience? What is it? Or I could identify some feature of my personality, call it my conscience, but what happens if it leads me astray? Then the rule is going to tell me to do what's actually wrong. For this rule to make sense, there's got to be some feature of my personality which is infallible and which I can identify. It has to have the big C, put it on its chest. I say, that's the one, and he's the one I have to follow. Is that realistic? I think as you grow, if you pay attention to your own changes, how many times the changes that happen to you are unexpected. Let's say you're 22. Ask yourself, when you were 17, how much of what you now are at 22 did you anticipate? And how much did you not anticipate? And how much were you quite sure wouldn't be there at 22? Most people find the transition from 17 to 22 is a gigantic transition. Now, what shall we say? At 22, you're finished? You're finished product? And at 120, you just hope not to be less than what you were at 22? Of course not. You're going to change throughout your lifetime. Often it happens that the older you get, the smaller the changes are, but not always. Not always. So, can you really follow a rule which says you should do what your conscience tells you to do? Now here comes the challenge to these ideas from people who know some Jewish sources. Jewish psychology is made up of two fundamental motivations, which usually conflict, not always, but usually conflict with one another. And monitoring the conflict and negotiating the conflict is a large part of our psychological lives. And these two motivations are called, in Torah terminology, the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, the good inclination and the evil inclination. Good inclination, as its name implies, is that part of your motivation that expresses the good. So, why isn't there a very simple answer? Follow that part of your motivation. The Torah certifies that you have in you something called a good inclination. The answer is what I hinted at before, because the Torah also says that it's often not identifiable. There's a famous incident in the book of Genesis where Jacob is alone at night, he's anticipating a meeting with his older brother, and he wrestles with an angel throughout the night. And the Midrash says that the angel's appearance shifted during the night. Part of the time, the angel appeared like a listim. Listim means an armed robber. And part of the time, the appearance of the angel was that of a Torah scholar. Now, our tradition tells us that this angel was really the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the Satan, the guardian spirit of Esau. So I understand very well, part of the time he appeared to be an armed robber. What does it mean to say that part of the time the evil inclination appeared to be a Torah scholar? So the sources indicate that temptations to do evil are a variety. And sometimes the temptation is brutal. I heard that this week there's a 2-for-1 sale at McDonald's. 2-for-1 bacon cheeseburgers. 50% off. If you buy two. So I think, oh yeah, but what about kashrus? I know, I'll be kosher next week. This week, there's a sale. I don't know. I'm doing it. That's just brutal disobedience. Brutal desire. But sometimes, the Yetzer Hara appears to a person touting Scripture, quoting Scripture, and quoting the Shulchan Aruch. Look, you're a rabbi, right? Here, look, right here in the Shulchan Aruch it says, do Q. It says right here, look, read it, Rabbi. It says do Q. Do Q. So maybe I should do Q. What he doesn't tell me is, when you turn over the page, it says, do Q on the third Thursday of the 7th month of each year, 1 day per year. Oh, I didn't see that footnote. I thought it was every day, every hour. But Desta points out how prejudiced we are. He says, imagine a person looking up the following halacha: can you play chess on Shabbos? Why do you think he's looking it up? Why would he be looking up that halacha? Is that a hard question? Because he wants to play chess on Shabbos. If that's what he wants, then when he looks it up, isn't he going to be biased about the outcome? The whole motivation for looking it up is to find out that it's permissible. Right? That's what he wants to find out. Now, the psychologists have a clever title for this. They're good at clever titles. Confirmation bias. Right? When you already have your mind made up, what you want the outcome to be, then the things that conform to what you want, you read and give more strength and more authority, and things that disagree, either you disregard them or discount them in one way or another, so as to preserve the bias that you have. So, person is ostensibly looking up the halacha, but he isn't balanced as to how he interprets the halacha or how he evaluates the halacha. So, he's consulting the Shulchan Aruch, but that doesn't stop his Yetzer Hara from getting in the way. And Mesilas Yesharim, he talks about how a person's evil inclination can corrupt his judgment. In a certain sense, that's the worst thing in the world. You have nothing to rely on other than your judgment. If your judgment isn't reliable, then your opinions, your decisions, your view, your understanding, all of it can be tainted. So from our point of view, although there is a good inclination, you often can't discern it. You can't distinguish it reliably from the other motivations that you have. So the rule can't be consult your good inclination, because you may not be able to do that. And I think I have heard people actually say things which indicate that they don't appreciate the fragility of this type of idea. I've actually heard people tell me, when you are considering what to do, the first thought that pops into your head is a communication from God that that's what you should do. So I challenge them. Show me a Torah source that says that. The Torah sources are unanimous. You think it through, you discuss it with other people, you consider objections. How many times do the Tanoim and Amoraim change their minds? If you change your mind, you have to do it following the first thought that came to your mind. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who disagree so many times, very often Beis Hillel changes its mind and comes to agree with Beis Shammai. They didn't follow the first thought that occurred to them. Then they'll tell you, okay, but there are meditative techniques by which you can get in touch with yourself. Sit in the forest, watch the water dripping from a log, look at a rainbow, a sunrise, a sunset, clear your mind of distractions, and get deeply, deeply in touch with yourself. Yeah, which self? Don't forget, the evil inclination is just as much genuinely part of yourself as the good inclination is. It's not an external intruder. It isn't as if you could simply say, well, this isn't me, so that's why I don't listen. It is you! It is you! The good inclination and the evil inclination are both parts of you. So, listening to these ideas isn't going to help. This is the answer to the objection that many people raise. Maimonides says, and others agree, that God created us with the capacity to know the difference between good and evil. It's something which is part of the human intellect, to be able to know the difference between good and evil. Now, notice carefully how I'm saying it. I do work hard to choose my words carefully because of my training. I said it's the capacity to know the difference between good and evil. I didn't say it's the knowledge, it's the capacity to know. But a capacity to know can be corrupted. It can be undone by bias. So, for example, what do you think there are more of in the world? Jews or anti-Semites? Is that a hard question? I hope not. Certain people of political persuasion today, they stumble over that question. But I think anyone who's still sane and has some knowledge of the world, there are about 15 million Jews, and there are at least hundreds of millions of anti-Semites. Maybe more, but at least hundreds of millions of anti-Semites. Now, are they all simply crazy? Are they all simply prejudiced? Are they all simply hateful? In the late 19th century, there were universities in Germany where to join the political clubs of the students, you had to sign a declaration of anti-Semitism. If you weren't willing to sign, you couldn't join the political club. These are university students in Germany. They certainly weren't dumb. Not all of them were just vicious. Some of them had their minds corrupted. They couldn't think straight. So if you tell such a person, meditate and figure out for yourself where you really stand, he's going to figure out something that's evil. And that's where he really stands at the moment, because his mind is corrupted. His judgment is corrupted. So when Maimonides says you have the capacity to know, capacities have to be developed. So here, for example, is an argument that's made by Rabbi Wasserman against a very common thought. The whole of the Torah system rests on the existence of God. A great deal of the system is commandments. Without a commander, there's no commandments. What can you say to an atheist? How can you convict him of fault? Where can you show him that what he's doing is wrong? If the whole system depends upon the existence of God and he doesn't accept the axiom on which the whole system rests. So Rabbi Wasserman says one way to expose him to his failure is to check his internal consistency. Don't try to overwhelm him with facts, arguments, proofs, literature. Check his internal consistency. Here's one way to do it. Ask him, are you aware that there are people who believe in God? Are you aware that some of them are well-educated, quite intelligent? Some of them know everything that you know and more. Some of them are professionals in advanced fields. Did you ever consider the possibility that he might be right? No? You didn't consider the possibility? Well, what rule of logic told you to just disregard them, since they're well-educated and very intelligent? Oh, you did consider the possibility that they're right. Well, then how did you make up your mind that they're wrong? What kind of investigation did you engage in to determine that they're wrong? Let me ask you a question. Suppose you had a problem with your health or with your business, or with political danger and so forth and so on. And you want to be safe. You want to have a productive life. What would you do? Wouldn't you read about it, correspond with people about it, think about it, try to analyze it and figure it out so as to come to the best conclusion you could? Sure you would. Well, the existence of God makes a difference, doesn't it? Doesn't it make a difference to how you live? What kind of investigation did you undertake to make up your mind that God doesn't exist? You didn't make an investigation? Why is that? Is that reasonable? By your own standards of reason. Doesn't it sound like maybe you have some prejudice here that's blocking the investigation? Like a love of cheeseburgers, maybe? Or rebellion against Socrates, who said the unexamined life is not worth living. And you said, don't bother me with examining my life. I'm not interested. I'm going to the beach. I'm having a good time. I'm not investigating. I think you'd find it hard to defend that in logic class. That's not obviously reasonable. If you would investigate your health, or investigate your money, or investigate your safety, why shouldn't you investigate whether the world has a creator or not? And you didn't investigate, then your mental process has been corrupted. Now you could do some depth analysis to figure out where the corruption came from, and maybe what to do about the corruption so as to think more clearly and more objectively. But you have put yourself in a situation where you can't think clearly about this situation. And it may take time and therapy to help you put yourself in a position where you can think about it clearly and objectively. So, the fact that the capacity to find the truth is there doesn't mean that everyone's going to find it. It doesn't mean that's easy and simple to find. So far, the idea of following your conscience has no reference point. There's no reference point. So what to do? Well, I think there's a way of rehabilitating the conscience, but it's a process. And you can get to the point where in some respects it is reliable, but you need a test. The good, capital G, was delivered to us by revelation. Now, how revelation delivers the good is a complex process. I happen to be of the opinion that, at least philosophically, God doesn't create morality, doesn't create it by his commands, doesn't bring it into being. When we say that God is good, we're saying something that has content. But he gave us a standard. And the standard is objectively good. So the first thing that you do is you learn to follow the standard. Just like children learn to follow what their parents tell them, not only because their parents are powerful. I don't think most children grow up feeling that they're in prison. I think most children grow up feeling that their parents love them, care for them, are concerned with their welfare, are investing in them so that they could be the best that they could possibly be. They know that from a great deal of what their parents do for them, like feed them and clothe them and teach them basic life skills and provide them with learning opportunities. So when the parents tell them to do something, often what they experience is, these people care about me, they want me to be the best that I can be, and that's why it's right for me to do what they say. And as a child growing up, one of the things you learn over and over and over again is, very often when they tell you to do something, you're not spontaneously inclined to do it. Absolutely not. And sometimes, at least, when you're driven by your positive motivation or by carrot and stick, to do what they tell you to do, you yourself see that things get better. So you learn something very valuable, that you are often naturally inclined in the wrong direction. For example, you don't want to share that toy. It's your toy. Other kids come over and they bring their toys up, but this is your toy. And you don't want to share it. And your father or your mother influences you one way or another to share the toy. And through it, you build a friendship with another child, which gives you more happiness than the toy did. So you learn, my parent knows how to make my life better, and I didn't know how to make it better. And indeed, I had to overcome my own natural feeling to make my life better in the direction that my parent influenced me to move. That's a very valuable lesson. I said between the ages of 4 and 16, you learn that lesson maybe 2,000 times. Now, of course, the first great hurdle comes at 16, because by the time you're 16, you know everything. And it's finished. You know everything that's true about politics and economics and social policy, and you're ready to go out on the barricades and demonstrate and tear down statues because you know what's right and what's wrong. You're at the ripe old age of 16. But then, when you move from 16 to 22, often a certain amount of caution sets in because of, again, the mistakes that you make and the fact that some people will tell you and you're initially inclined against. And when you finally bring yourself to do it, you see that your life improves in clear, objective ways that are valuable to you. So you begin to feel that there is a body of information. Body of information does have validity. Sometimes I can even see the validity in my own life, but I'm naturally inclined often against it. So I have to learn from that body of information, and I have to learn to train myself to at least act in accordance with it. That's the first step. Now, those of us, well, I shouldn't say us because I wasn't brought up that way, but those who are brought up in a Torah context, the values that serve your life and then inspire you to change what you want to get out of life, what you want to contribute to life, what's really important in life for you and for other people, those values are tied to Torah sources. So you learn that this is a repository of wisdom, and finally you learn that it's based on prophecy. This isn't just the wise thoughts of Jews. Even Pirkei Avos, the ethics of the fathers. It starts with Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Moses received the Torah at Sinai. So the Bartanura says, why is it that the ethics of the fathers start with that statement? To let you know that statements in that book are not Jewish wise ruminations, Jewish wise intuitions. It's rather part of a Masorah tradition that's handed down going back to Sinai. And indeed, the proof of it is that one of the sages who's quoted, his contribution to the book is the words, B'mpor levecha al tismach, when your enemy falls, don't rejoice. And those words are words of the Tanakh. He didn't make those words up at all. He's quoting them from a holy book. So it's certainly not the wisdom of these great scholars, these great sages. Book of Mishlei, Proverbs. So there is this tradition, the tradition of wisdom, and you learn from experience that following it makes your life better. Now, I should put in a footnote here. Makes it better means you have your values and your goals, or you have your perceptions, you have your feelings, and you're measuring it against the results that you experience. That's an immature state, because that still makes your experience and your understanding the judge of whether it's correct or not. After a while, you get to the point where you learn to trust it beyond your judgment. You don't judge every feature of it on the basis of your own experience. The word emunah in Hebrew is sometimes translated in English translations as faith. I think that's a big mistake. The word faith is a Christian word. It's owned by Christianity, and Christianity set the meaning of faith. And usually faith means believing something without reason. Specifically without reason. I don't think that Jewishly we're ever required to do that, ever. I think emunah should be translated as rational trust. Trust means I go beyond what I myself can verify, but I can have good reason to go beyond what I myself can verify, like when I trust my doctor, or my lawyer, other professionals who give me the benefit of their expertise. I can't verify what they say, but I have good reason to trust them. I think that emunah is a rational trust in a system which is demonstrated, so far as you can perceive at all, is demonstrated its wisdom, and then that leads you to trust it beyond what you can understand, beyond what you can verify for yourself. Now, here's an experience which thoughtful Jews have. I don't know if everybody gets to this point. Maybe it's not important for everybody to get this point. I'm not touting it. I'm praising it. But here's what happens to many people. You're confronted with a new problem. You start to think about it, and you take a guess. It seems to me that this would be the way to handle it. Then you go to the sources. And as you get older, you find that your intuition gets more and more accurate. That's quite interesting. I have this, so do, I would say, most people who learn Torah texts regularly over a long period of time. When there's a problem in the text, and you think, I'll bet that's the answer. And then you turn over the page, you look at the commentary, and the commentary says that that's the answer. You say, okay, so I'm catching on. So next time, when I think that maybe that's the answer, I have reason to trust it. I'll tell you, one of the most joyous experiences where you say, they can't be right. It can't be right. The words don't fit. And then you read the commentator, and the commentator says, the text is wrong. The Ger says wrong. Really, these words should be replaced by those words. Say, yes, it was wrong. There wasn't a mistake. I wasn't missing it. I got it right to the extent that this commentator says the words aren't the right words. You think to yourself, okay, I am catching on. Now, something's true with right and wrong, with good and evil. If you think about these problems and wrestle with them, and then you go to the tradition, and your judgment becomes more and more confirmed, then you can say that my intuition is being schooled, and it's catching on to the message of the tradition. And I can tell you this goes subject by subject, because I haven't spent a lot of time in learning Jewish civil law and criminal law, and there are these weekly sheets that are handed out in the synagogues with cases that are actually coming from the literature, and they give you the problem, and you're supposed to figure out on your own what the answer would be, and then on the back side of the page they tell you the answer, and usually when I think about those, I'm wrong. Usually I'm wrong. So I say, okay, I definitely have not developed the intuition for this. But in other types of cases, I'm very often right. So then you can trust your intuition. Here's a fact about intuition, which I think, again, people are sort of doctrinaire. Either intuition is everything or is nothing. Neither is correct. Intuition is something which at times can be very valuable if it receives external confirmation. I'll give you an example. Who becomes a psychologist? Usually, it's people who have a natural understanding of other people. The study of psychology, hopefully, not always, but hopefully, refines their understanding or provides them with some alternatives they didn't think of, or with particular tools that would be useful to them in terms of the given orientation. But people to whom other people are a blank, and whenever they try to figure them out, they get it wrong, they become engineers, or they become mathematicians. They don't become psychologists because they haven't got any talent for it. So what happens is that your intuition gets confirmed. That shows that you really do have some grasp. You really do have some understanding. Everyone relies on that kind of understanding a lot of the time, because a great deal of what we know about the world can't be written down in precise language with well-defined terms and applied literally. It's too subtle for that. So you can learn through experience that your intuition is good in certain areas, and then when a problem comes up, of course, the best thing to do is to go to the sources, and even better than that, check with somebody who knows the sources. But in the meantime, if your intuition tells you that this should be the right way out, then you have reason to trust it because you've learned from experience that your intuition is correct. This is not at all the same as following your conscience. This, you could perhaps meld this into the idea of listening to your good inclination by saying that testing my intuition against the tradition and learning where it agrees and where it disagrees, I'm learning which voice is the voice of my good inclination. That could be. But you learn it by testing from the outside. You don't learn it because it carries some indelible psychological stamp, because it's very inspiring, because it's thrilling, because it gives you a feeling of oneness with the universe and that sort of thing. Absolutely not. I believe, maybe people disagree with me, and I don't think I can prove this, just my experience tells me that there were Nazis who at the end of the day would say, today was not a good day. It was not a good day because I was lazy in killing Jews. I could have killed 16, I only killed 13. It's a lousy day. I was negligent. I wasn't faithful to the Führer and to the Reich by killing those extra 3 Jews. Is he in touch with himself? He may very well be in touch with himself. Because at this point in time, his self is killing Jews as efficiently as possible. There are probably features of himself which, if inspired in a certain way, if affected a certain way, would cause him to undergo a transformation where he would change. But right now, that's where he is. So this hunt inside is really poison. Now, I say this in part because I grew up in the Reform movement in the United States, and Reform and all the other isms that are outside of the traditional realm are very largely subjective. I wouldn't say they're wholly subjective, but they're very largely subjective. If it's meaningful to you, if it seems right to you, if it's inspiring to you, then it's right for you, period. That's subjective, but it's also wrong. That is to say, there's a truth about what you are also. And as I've been stressing now for 45 minutes, you may be wrong about yourself. So the fact that you believe it's right for you and feel that it's right for you and you're inspired by it doesn't even mean it's right for you. Often enough, on the basis of judgments like that this is what's right for me, we engage in a process and later on we regret it. Why do we regret it? Because we discover that we made a mistake, that it really isn't right for me. This happens in relationships. There's a word in English which expresses it. It's called infatuation, where a person can get involved with another person to the extent that for a while the whole world revolves around the other person, and sometime later they come to realization that the other person was using them. It wasn't a genuine relationship at all. And they were fooling themselves, blinding themselves. That's a desperately wrong judgment about what's good for me. I thought it was the best for me, and it was terrible for me. So the fact that you think it's best for you doesn't mean you're right. Even though you're talking only for yourself, doesn't mean that you're right. So I think that we have, in the end, no use for this idea of a conscience. Now, having said that, I want to end with an idea which I would say, in a certain sense, modifies it, but I think they both stand. having talked about there not being any guarantee and not identifying what the voice of the good is in you and so forth and so on, to what extent are we supposed to imagine that individual people or different cultures really differ in their commitments, in the values that they recognize, the values that they validate? Shouldn't we expect that they will vary from one extreme to the other, since there's nothing objective that it's based on? I don't know what we would expect, but the truth is that the variation from culture to culture, from period of time to period of time, is much, much less than people imagine. I grew up under the spell of Margaret Mead and Company, where different cultures were wildly different in their values, and everything was relative and so on and so on. Then in the 80s and 90s, there was a rebellion. She was very widely discredited. And now they're talking about cultural universals. But when you think about the cases which are supposed to be the paradigm of radically different values, if you think about them, I think you can see quite simply that it's a mistake. Let's take the Nazis. Didn't the Nazis have radically different values from other people in the West, from what some would call normal people generally? The answer is no. Their values were not significantly different at all. And the proof of it is this. When the Nazis justified anti-Semitism, they did it by making up a myth about the Jewish people. Jews are evil. Jews own the banks. Jews own the means of communication and reporting. Jews control the world for their own benefit. Jews are trying to steal everything that you own. Jews poison the wells. Jews use non-Jewish blood for the matzahs. Why did they make up all those stories? What did they need them for? Why did they simply say, Jews are nice people, good people, honest people, and we kill them because that's our values. Our values is to kill people like that. Your values is not to kill people like that. No problem. We said different values. Why did they bother making up those stories? Because if you believe those stories, then you kill Jews with all the old values. You're killing Jews because they're out to ruin you, to murder you, to take over your society. It's just self-defense. The very fact that they made up those stories means they're using the same old values that everybody else is using. The Europeans who came to North America, and there was this problem that North America was already inhabited. What a disappointment. You know, if there had been just bears and antelope, it would have been very easy. But there are these two-legged creatures running around. We want land from sea to shining sea, it says in the American mythology. Right? From the Atlantic to the Pacific, it all belongs to us. Oh, but it's no problem. Because a red-skinned, two-legged creature isn't human. Not human. Just an animal. There's no moral prohibition against taking land from animals. There's only moral prohibition of taking land from other people. They're not people. So that's why we can take their land. They didn't brutally say, we have guns that they don't, so we're taking their land, period. Because that would have violated the old values. You don't just take a gun and use it to take away another person's land. You don't do that. It's wrong to do that. But so you define them as not being people. When you have to gerrymander the facts, that's usually a symptom that you're using the old values. It's very hard to find fundamental difference of values. Very hard. Sparta left out to die weak and sickly children. We think, wow, that's monstrous, that's inhuman. But they believed that they were in a constant fight for survival, that they needed the maximum number of able-bodied soldiers, and they couldn't divert the economy to cater for people who would be just a drain and help prevent being conquered and enslaved and destroyed. They didn't just have no care for their children. In their eyes it was care for children that become conquered and enslaved, or leave the children and defend yourself. That's not an easy decision. So the general capacity to develop values is there. And under normal human condition, some of it will develop normally. Some of it will. It's not totally fluid. It's not totally without content. But the content can be distorted. It can be influenced by using your imagination to create different facts so as to get the outcome you want without changing the values. Bias and prejudice can lead you to administering the values in an unfair way. It's subject to distortion. The bottom line is you can't get infallible moral knowledge from introspection, even though societies generally have general values that are very much shared. Okay.